Welcome back to Sunlit Brushstrokes. I'm so excited that you've joined me today as we work on this beautiful thank you card. This is a really fun project and it's beginner friendly, so I'm really excited to get started with you. Today I'm going to be using this coloring card from my Etsy shop. However, you could apply the techniques that I'm showing you today to any coloring page with flowers or even a flower that you've drawn yourself. This coloring card actually comes in a set with another coloring card with a scripture verse, a full-size coloring page, and coordinating bookmarks. If you purchase this card, you'll get the entire set. But today I'm just going to work with this one. And as I said, the 5x7 is what I'm going to be using because it's a nice size. I will also mention, I always like to work with the gray outlines for the coloring pages. I do have black as well, like black outlines for these florals in the same set. I tend to work with the gray because I like the fact that the outline tends to kind of disappear as you color. It provides enough guidance to color, but not so much that it's overpowering. So that's my personal opinion. I'm going to be working with the gray outlines, but you can definitely work with the black outlines if you prefer. First things first, what I want to do is start the project by putting a piece of painter's tape along here. You could cut the card out entirely and then fold it. I'm thinking I'm going to leave it on the page as it is because it's going to allow me to be able to just go over the lines a little bit in some places, and then I can trim it down afterwards. And I think it might be a little bit of a challenge to work with the fold there, so I'm going to just, instead of folding it right now, I'm just going to take a piece of painter's tape and put it across there. Now, my concern with the painter's tape is that it's quite sticky, and I'm concerned about it like tearing the paper. So I'm going to unsticky it. That's not a word, but I'm going to make it less sticky by rubbing my hand along the sticky side of this tape so that it's just going to be sticky enough to stay down, but not sticky enough to tear the paper. So just kind of getting a little bit of, there we go. It seems pretty unsticky to me. The end there was sticky, but most of that seems pretty good. So I'm going to just line it up with where these two fold lines are here. I'm going to try and just put it down on the one side, right up kind of at the fold line, and then on that side. And then I'll push it down. You can also, before you go ahead and even put this right down, you could test how sticky it is on another piece of paper and just make sure that it's unsticky. It's not a word, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started with our colored pencils. So the colors that we're going to be using today, I've listed in the description below, and I'm trying to keep it fairly simple, but I'm going to be starting with these yellows. This is canary yellow and goldenrod, and I've put them in these pencil extenders because in my case, they're both very short. And before I start working, I want to just do a little practice exercise together. I've showed you this in one of my prior videos, but I thought because this is a beginner video, let's do this again because we're going to be using the same techniques. So I've got myself a small scrap of paper. This is cardstock. Oh, and I should also mention, I'm working on cardstock. This is Michael's Recollection cardstock. I like it. It's just a nice level of smooth. So I've gone ahead, and it's a helpful thing to just have your piece of cardstock that you're going to do your practice on to be the same. It'll behave the same. So I'm going to grab a colored pencil. I'm grabbing a pencil color that I'm not going to be using in my project so that I don't, get my freshly sharpened pencils dull before I even start. And what we want to do here is just practice our pencil pressure. So what we're going to be doing is working from a light pressure and then deepening it to dark, and then going vice versa. So one way to get your pressure nice and light is to hold further back on the pencil. So that's what I'm going to start doing, and I'm going to work in a circular motion. And I'm going to try and get myself a really nice, soft, light. This is a red pencil I'm using here, kind of a reddish pink color, but I just want a really nice, soft layer of color here. And then as I work towards the right, I'm going to start applying a little more pressure. And as I start to apply more pressure, I can also work down the like closer to the tip of the pencil. Great, that's a little bit of a jump. Go back here. If you work too quickly to the top of your pencil, you're going to find it hard to get a smooth transition from light to dark. So I'm just trying to work my way down a little slower. Okay, now I'm moving down a little bit more. And I can come in closer. closer. And then finally, I'm going to push quite hard. So I'll just come in nice and close, and I can even like tilt my pencil if I need to have it in a more upright position so that I can really dig that pigment into the paper. There we go. So that's about as dark as this particular pencil is going to get. But I'm pushing very hard and I'm actually almost like denting the paper. So that's a situation where, you know, you're not going to use that pressure very often, but towards the end of a project you will. So let's do the reverse now. So let's do a little faster. We'll try and create a faster transition, but I'm going to start with a very hard pressure and then lighten off. So I can start by lightening off just by reducing the pressure that I'm applying. But in order to get a soft whisper, it might be helpful. That actually isn't too bad. I'm managing to get pretty light without even moving up the pencil. But if you're struggling with getting that really soft pressure, just hold further back on your pencil. And it takes, ooh, I'm getting a little sloppy, sorry. It takes a little practice to get the hang of the light pressure, but sometimes it can be quite helpful to hold it further back as you get nice, soft, gentle pressure there. So now that we've got that technique figured out, we're going to go ahead and work on our project. And we'll be varying the pressure, but there's going to be areas that we're going to want to push a little harder, a little lighter, and we're going to want that transition to happen smoothly. So I'm going to go ahead first and start with my lightest color, and I'm going to use the yellow and just go where there's kind of the little stamen and all these little parts of the center of the flower. This is actually an Alberta rose, or maybe wherever you live you call it a wild rose. It's actually our provincial flower, so I call it an Alberta rose. But I'm just going to go ahead and get a little bit of this yellow in several places, and this is the canary yellow. We have these growing on our property, and so they tend to show up often in my work. And I'm not pushing too hard because I don't want this to be overbearing, this yellow. I want to be able to come in here afterwards and add another color on top. So I'm just going to go lightly in here. So that's our centers of our flower. And then I'm going to quickly grab the goldenrod, which is kind of a more of a dull yellow. And I'm just going to go in and very lightly put some of that on top. And I'm going to increase the pressure on top of areas that have shadow. So let's just zoom in a little bit. You can kind of see here, there's some shadow on the flower. Okay, here's an example down here. This flower, there's some shadow. You can see it in the coloring page. You can just go ahead and darken that with the goldenrod. And I'm going to kind of create like a little bit of a moon shape on this one. I'm taking a bit of artistic license because I don't quite like the way that shadow is situated there, but just make it how you want the shadow. And then I'm just going to come in and add some of this to the little stamens on here. You can even take a few little strokes down if you want to kind of cover these little lines here. And I'll just go ahead and do that everywhere. Now the final color, if you want to call it a color, that I'm going to use is this sienna brown. Now I'm not crazy about adding browns. I typically would choose something like a terracotta, which is kind of a rust color, but it's not included in every pencil set. So I thought, well, this one will do the job. And I'm going to just put it where there's shadows. So I'm going to go a little bit over here and maybe a little bit into these stamen, just kind of add a little bit of texture. So I'm just kind of almost like creating little curl things. So I'm just going to go ahead and do these little dotty things. So they're kind of like just tiny little curls, little circles. You can do half circles, just kind of this curling motion. And that's what I'm aiming for in the stamen, because we don't want to have it just solid brown here. So I'm just going to go in and do a little bit of this. And you could do it as well if you feel like this is too much of a jump from, you know, maybe the yellow to the brown. You can come back in and throw a little bit of the goldenrod on top of the sienna brown. And down here, wherever it gets really close to kind of almost like the center of the flower, I'm going to deepen the shadow as well. I'm just going to show where the outside of this little center shape is, and then just come in with some of these little dots. And I'll just carry on and do that again everywhere on these little flower centers. All right, so we've got those down, and this is where I do appreciate having the opportunity to just run off the page or off of the outline of our card, because I can just color and not worry about what it feels like when I hit the edge of the paper. Sometimes that can send your pencil flying a little bit. So I'm just noticing one spot I missed. I didn't really get these little lines too clear. There we go. Just add a little bit of goldenrod on top. Okay, let's go ahead and use our pink. With this pink, we're just going to go ahead and fill in the petals with just a nice solid layer of pink. Not too heavy a pressure. I'm going to say I'm using kind of medium pressure in my hand right now, and I'll be coming in with a little bit more variation in my next layer. So I'm just going to come in and fill these in. While you're at it, don't forget the little rosebuds. I find these can actually change a little bit in terms of what shade of pink they are. If the sun has been shining on them, they almost tend to get a little bit bleached, and then they're very, I wouldn't say super light pink, but a lighter pink. And then if they're in the shade or freshly, open, or maybe it's been cloudy for several days, I find that they tend to be a deeper, richer, almost magenta pink. We're going to go ahead and add a kind of a magenta pink now. This one is called Process Red. However, a magenta would be fine as well. And this is where we're going to start creating a little bit more of that variation that you can see here, where we're, in some areas using heavier pressure, some areas using lighter pressure. This first layer was just pretty much the same everywhere. This time we're going to start creating a little bit of depth by varying our pressure and creating a little bit of shadows using this deeper pink. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to be putting this in a few places. I'm going to be covering the, you can kind of see those light outlines from the coloring book page. I'm going to kind of cover those with this pink. And I'm using kind of like more of a linear motion. So I'm just creating like a line almost there, just kind of a more of a linear form of coloring. And then I'm going to come behind anywhere there's some overlap happening among the flowers. So this petal here, say, is in front of this petal here. I'm going to be darkening the one that's behind, so especially where those edges are meeting. So I'm going to do that, and I'm also going to deepen the edges or the outside of each petal. I know sometimes it can vary where the darks and the lights are. Sometimes it has to do with how the light's hitting the flower and the shadows and all the rest. But I'm going to come up and do these interesting little folds and creases here. So I'm going to do that. And I'm noticing my pencil, it's hard to see, but I've noticed a little bit of tiny little crumbs falling off of it because it's a nice sharp pencil. And when that happens, I would actually recommend having a brush to be able to brush that off. This is actually a makeup brush. It hasn't been used for makeup. It's just a nice, simple, soft brush that you can dust the little crumbs away. If you try and rub them off with your hand, occasionally you can end up like pressing them deeper into the paper and making a mess. So it is helpful to have a little brush that you can just kind of quickly clean things up with. So again, I'm going to come down, and I was kind of getting a little bit of a jump from the dark pink to the light pink. So I'm trying to create a bit of a gradation here because I don't like how the colors are jumping. Sometimes they do jump depending on the way the shadow is, but I wasn't quite happy with the way that was happening there. So I'm just going to create that kind of in-between pressure. And then again, you can see I covered the little creases and folds. So I'm going to come into this petal here, and I'm going to deepen where it's meeting this one. So the back one is going to be darker. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a nice deep color there. And you can like gradually move from the dark to the light, or in some cases, a situation like this, there can be a harsh shadow that you can kind of just have it jump more from dark to light. So I created a slight gradation, but not super strong. So I'm just gonna go in there. And again, I'm trying to lighten off as I come towards the center. Sometimes you will end up with shadows near the center if these little stamen are casting a shadow onto the flower. And sometimes you'll even get like individual little shadows from each of these little stamen shapes, and they'll do something like this right on the flower. So you can choose if you want to add that. That's just an extra little option. You don't have to do that, but that's something that you can sometimes see happening when the stamen are casting shadows onto the, and it wouldn't happen around the whole flower, I should mention. It's casting shadows onto part of the flower. So if the sunlight was coming and hitting from one side, it would only be on one side of the flower. It wouldn't encircle the whole center. So this one is almost coming a little too close to this side. I could almost lighten that a little bit if I wanted to, but I'll just leave it for now. And I'll come in here and I'm going to darken this so it's behind. So I'm just going to go ahead and darken that, and then just softly come in here. Add a little more color here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and work on this one. And then I'll probably speed the camera up a little bit so that you don't have to watch me do every little shape. But let's go here because this one is definitely a petal that's behind the others. So I'm going to push quite hard and then lighten up as I come working my way up from that overlap. And then again, I'll darken the edges here. So do that, and then in here, there's a little bit of an overlap. This petal here feels like it's in front of that one. So I just darkened again where the edges are meeting. And then I'm going to do that at the edge of it over here because the edges are meeting this one, and I think this is in front. So just do that. And then this one is just going to have some shadow, or not shadow, darker pink at the top of it, if that makes sense. Let's zoom in just to that flower for a minute so you can kind of see more closely what I'm doing. So I'm gonna come in here and start dark and lighten off. And I'm almost losing my shape, so I'm gonna go a little bit harder there to get my little petal creases in there. And then I'm gonna use medium pressure to fill this one in, because this one is the one that's really the most on top or closest towards us. It's not behind, so I'm not going to put as much pressure on with it. And I'll just kind of cover these little creases and whatever that are happening. Do a little bit of creases. Just some of these tiny little lines that you can see here. Just do them at the top of this shape. But I don't want to overdo because this is our front petal, and so I want it to be nice and light. Okay, now I'm going to come over here, and you might not be able to see because this is already covered with pink, but you can actually, there's a little bit of creases that are happening even just within the coloring page. You can see, like on the coloring page, those creases are there with light gray, and you can just cover those up with the pink and it will give the effect of shadow. And then I'm just going to lightly fill this in. I'm going to put a little bit maybe on the top, but I have to be careful because I want this shape, which is behind, to definitely look like it's behind. So I'm going to put more pressure here and just fill this shape in, and it's going to be quite dark and dark on the edges. Maybe I can just have one area that's a little lighter in the middle with a little bit of a gradation, but overall this is a dark petal back here because it's behind. Okay, one more left to this flower. Do a little bit again, working those creases, and maybe just a little bit right here where it's meeting the edge of this one that's in front. All right, I'm going to call that good for that flower for now. So the three things I'm really focusing on darkening are the folds that are here that you can kind of see, these little creases, these little lines within the petals. I'm putting a little bit of extra dark along the top edge so that I have a lighter center. And then I'm trying to darken where there would be overlap between the petals. So this one's a little in front of this one, so it will be casting a little bit of a shadow on the one behind. And if you can't even tell sometimes when you're using a photo which one is behind, you can just make that decision and push one back by darkening the back one. I noticed on this one as I was coloring some of the line work I had done on the first layer with the light pink was kind of going in a funny direction. So my recommendation is when you're coloring, still think about what direction these little lines and creases are going. And again, darkening the shadow that's behind here. Okay, and right here I want to deepen the shadow behind this one because I can see that I didn't do that very clearly. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go darker as I'm at the base of this petal, lighten off, and then just get these nice little creases and stuff that are along the top. And then go even darker here with my dark pink and lighten off as I come forwards or up on the petal. And then I'm going to be darkening along the top edge again because it's kind of, we've got a mixture of things happening on this one, right? We've got the top edge that we want to have darker, but we also have this shadow that's happening here and this whole kind of front to back concept. And so that's where it has to go dark at the base and at the top. This petal has kind of darkness with both edges because this petal seems like it's kind of pushed behind the others. So I'm going to darken that, lighten this, or not lighten, push a little lighter. Do the same thing here. I'm going to get a little bit of darker along the top edge, but then I want to really make sure that I lighten off my pressure. Maybe move further back on my pencil as I'm getting this section done here so that I don't go too hard and too heavy because this is a lighter petal. It's kind of in front. Let's get a little bit of darkness along that top edge and make sure we get those creases in there. I want to just keep thinking kind of like that whole what's behind, what's in front, and anything that's behind is where you're going to really want to focus on adding a little bit of darkness where the edges are meeting, as well as paying attention to shadows, which are usually getting cast as well by the petal in front of it. Ooh, that was a really harsh line there. Again, edges meeting, so I want the back one to be a little bit darker. And I think I want to come into this one a little bit and just add a little bit more color just along here. It feels like it's a little bit light compared to everything else. What do you think about those cast shadows? Should I add any more anywhere else? Those shadows that are being cast by the stamen? I could. I'm not sure if I really like that, but you decide. If you like them, add them. If you don't really like them, just skip them. All right, let's just come in and do a little bit of detail on the buds. So I'm just gonna try and, I've got a nice sharp pencil here. I'm gonna kind of trace the gray outlines that are here as far as the little creases and folds and curves that are happening. I want the bottom part of this bud to be a little darker than the top because it's going to be further from the light. And then I'm just going to try and kind of trace a little bit of those so that I get a little bit of that little curly folded leaf that's in the middle there. And I'm going to do the same thing here. You can even add a few of your own little strokes as well, just to kind of make it look like it's got lots of folds in that little bud. And the final step is optional, but if you feel like you'd like a little bit more punch or a little bit more dramatic shadows in some areas, I'm going to use a combination of Tuscan red and mulberry. The mulberry is kind of a purpley color. The Tuscan red is super deep red. And I'm just going to go ahead and just a few spots. And again, it's optional, but you could go in a few spots and just deepen the shadows. So mostly I'm just using light pressure. I'm going to mostly be using the mulberry, which is more of a purple color, but every now and then if I feel the need to push it even further, I'll pick up the Tuscan red and push it a little further. For the most part, I'll be using just the mulberry purple. I'm going to add a little bit of the mulberry in here. And this is, again, this particular flower is a darker, richer color because it is kind of more in the shadow. It's turning, it's, you know, it's kind of like sloped, or not sloped, it's drooping downwards. And so in the droopiness, it's having a lot more shadow because it's blocking the light with its own upper leaves, or upper petals, not leaves, sorry. And so it's going to have these nice deep darks. And I'm just snapping my pencil, so I'm just going to brush that off. Come back in. So yes, I'm kind of just using a combination of picking up the mulberry and the Tuscan just enough, just very lightly, to kind of just push my shadows just a little further than they are already pushed with our darker pink or our process red. So I'm just trying to do that just a few areas, and it's totally optional. If you're happy with the pinks the way they are, just leave them. And just going to use a little bit of a back and forth motion in a few spots to create these creases. I would generally say to pick up the purple, like the mulberry color, before the Tuscan red, just because it's not as deep and dark. However, I have sometimes grabbed the Tuscan red first and then thrown the purple on top. You just have to be careful you don't go too heavy with the Tuscan red because it's very dark and can very quickly take over and make things look too dark. So safer thing is probably to just start with the mulberry. The main thing I would say is if you're using these dark colors like the mulberry and the Tuscan red in one area of your work, you probably want to at least add it in a few spots in other flowers just to kind of harmonize it. If you just use it on one flower, it'll probably end up making that flower look really disjointed from everything else. So you don't have to put a lot of it everywhere else, but just put a little bit and just push some of the shadows back a little bit with it, and just add a little tiny bit of dark. I'm grabbing my kneaded eraser and I'm lifting here a little bit because I felt like I was kind of getting a little bit too much of my darks happening here. I'm just lifting it. A kneaded eraser is a soft, workable eraser that you can use to just lift a little bit when you're working with colored pencil, and it doesn't create a mess, which is really nice. So I can just lift, I can dab, and then I can just come back in here with my process red, that's the dark pink, and just fill that back up. It just was a little bit too much mulberry, purple and Tuscan red. I'm not happy with this one petal here. I don't know. I think maybe it needs a little more creases. I'm not sure what it is. Oh, definitely I can push it back a little bit. It's not showing. I didn't add enough darkness to show that it's behind. We'll try that. Add a little bit more to the edges, maybe a little bit more creasing. I can even take artistic license and throw a few creases in there with just this kind of linear movement. Kind of like that. I think that's better. I'm just going to throw a little bit more of this purple behind here. Just pushing my shapes. And then I can just throw a tiny bit of these colors into the buds as well, just to show that they're deep color. All right, let's go ahead and do the greens. Let's see how quickly we can pull them off. The green that I really, really like is the lime peel. It's just a beautiful, kind of a neutral light green. So it's different than the spring green or the chartreuse. Chartreuse is one of the colored pencils that you could get by with in this step, but it's almost too intense, and so you'd do better to use this one. It's a little duller. It kind of just adds a nice touch of green. So I'm just going ahead and I'm going to use the lime peel and fill in the leaves in the entire picture here. And when I've got it all on there, then I'll come back and add in my shadows and details on the leaves. I'm noticing I missed a petal right here, so I'm just going to quickly fill that in using the two pinks. Let's just do that really quick. I don't think I'll have to use everything there, but I'll just get these two 2 on here. Yeah, that's pretty good. Use I went just a solid kind of medium pressure with my light pink, and a little bit of a variation with the darker pink or the process red. And jumping back into the greens. Realize that I'm leaning my hand into the work I've just done, so I'm grabbing a piece of paper to slide under my hand so that I don't smudge things too much. Colored pencil doesn't smudge too bad, but it can lift a little bit, and you can end up finding you've got colored pencil on your hand where you're kind of leaning into it. It's just handy to kind of put something under your hand so that you can, handy to put something under your hand. It's just helpful to have something under your hand so that you can avoid smudging or rubbing things around, just in the event that it does lift at all. And there's some situations where maybe depending on the paper you use or how heavy your layers are, that's more of an issue, but I'm not having problems with that today. It's just a good habit to get into. So to do the shadows on the leaves, I'm going to go ahead and show the areas that are darker. So I'm going to just come in here with my olive green, and I'm going to just color with this, again, circular motion, but varying my pressure again so that I'm going from light to dark or dark to light, and I'm going to darken the areas that are right behind some of the petals, and I'm going to lighten off as I work my way further down the leaf. And then I'm also going to go ahead and use the same green and just kind of cover these little lines that we have going here for the little veins in the leaves. Now, if you want to take this a step further, you can also, I'm going to zoom in on one of these leaves. Let's do this one because it's a big one and it's going to show the effect the most. So I'm just going to zoom in here for a minute. And I'm going to show you one way you can create a little bit more depth, but again, this is a little bit more complicated. So if you want to keep it simple, just use your pencil and outline the little veins, and that's good. But I'm going to show you another step you can add. So I'm just going to go ahead and just put a little bit of dark at the base here. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that line to each of these little veins here, but then I'm going to take this a step further, and instead of just leaving it like that, I'm just going to lightly put that vein up to there. I'm going to start, so at the base of the leaf, so maybe like say right here, I'm going to go a little heavier at the base and then gradually lighten off my pressure. So it's like a little heavier down here and then lighten off. And then when I come to the next vein, I'm going to go heavier at the edge of the vein, just on the bottom edge, and then I'm going to lighten off. And then I'm going to go heavier at the base of this vein and then lighten off. And I'm going to do that as I work my way up. Now that's a more complicated step. So if you want to just trace those veins using your olive green colored pencil, you can absolutely do that. If you want to take it to another level, you can add this extra step. So I'm going to actually make it darker as well, where it touches the center vein, just on this side of the leaf. So darker where it touches the center, and then lighten up. So it's kind of getting dark at the vein, both veins. So there's two veins where it's getting dark. It's getting dark at the center vein and the vein that's kind of running this direction on the leaf, kind of upwards here. So I'm not achieving that as well at this moment. Darker here, and lighten off. Let's try and get that at the bottom, darker at the base and darker at the vein. You can kind of see how that's happening. I didn't quite do that one as well. Let's repeat that on another one just to make it clear what we're doing. And then you can go ahead and take license and do what you prefer to do. If you like that effect, which is a little bit more tricky, do that. Or if you prefer to just kind of outline your veins, which is beautiful still, do that. So pick your level of complication here. I'm just going to repeat that though, this same technique I did here. I'm going to repeat it here just to make sure it was clear, because I kind of got a little bit sloppy with my pressure. So I want to make sure that it's clear. I'm going to add a vein right there as well because it doesn't seem like quite enough. So you can pick which side of the vein is going to have more shadow. So I'm going to just go ahead and let's do this side first. We're going to do the left side. So I'm going to go dark at the base of this vein, and then I'm going to go dark at this vein. So it's kind of doing like that, but then I'm going to just soften off the pressure. I'm going to go dark here, and then I'm going to soften off, lighten off, or whatever, lighten my pressure as I move away from that. So I have to kind of do it kind of gradually. That takes a little bit of practice. So that's where I say this is a little bit more complex, but it's a way you can add a little bit more depth to your leaves. So we'll go to this side. I'm just going to do, instead of doing the darker part at the center vein, all I'm going to focus on is the darker part of these veins that run towards the edge of the leaf. So that one, in general, this side will look a little bit lighter right next to the vein. Try to darken up down here. One benefit of having these nice light grade lines is that you can kind of get away with a little bit of error. Even if you go out of the lines or change your shape a little bit, you kind of can. If you need to change a shape as you're working, you can choose to do that because you probably won't be able to see the grade lines by the time you get all these layers of pencil on top. For instance, if I wanted to add a little leaf here on this bud, I could. And probably you wouldn't know it hadn't been there, except you guys know. But if I was to give that to somebody on a card, I don't think they would know. I just added that. Took artistic license. So that's one thing you can kind of do with the light gray lines. It gives you a little more freedom to explore. So again, if the leaf doesn't have a vein on it, you can decide to add the vein, or I'll just erase those and show you, you can just create a gradation from the center outward. So let's do that this time. This is another little change in pace. So I've got the vein in the center. Kind of lifted that line peel. Let me just fix that. Okay, so skip the idea of veins and you can just work from, say, the kind of dark in the center and work your way out light. So that's the way you can handle it. If you don't see a vein on there, you can simplify. So do that in a few places too. And if you're trying to try a new technique and it doesn't quite work out for you the way that you hoped the first time, don't worry about it. Give yourself grace. It takes practice. The more you do, the easier it'll get. And even sometimes, as you saw, when I was doing that, I wasn't 100% happy with what I was doing. So give yourself grace if you're on any new concepts or new areas of the painting. So here you can, and so just decide what you feel the most comfortable with. Like I say, here's an example. You can just kind of outline those veins, trace the shape of the veins, and then call that good and just put a nice light layer of your olive green on the rest of the shape. You can also choose to just outline your leaves just really simply and then go from dark on the outside and kind of lighten off, and then get dark again as you come towards the flower. So there's another way you can keep your leaves simple. Let's repeat that somewhere else. Say you wanted to do this leaf here, you could just kind of come along, get the outline of your little leaf, and you wouldn't even have to get all these details again because, I just went outside the line. I'm just gonna fix that. Because, again, these lines on the coloring book page are so light. If you go outside the line, nobody's gonna know except you. Or if you straighten a line so it's a little less textured, again, it's not a big deal. Fill in this little spot. Again, keep in mind that you want to darken these shapes as you kind of get closer into, kind of as they go behind the flowers. Just always keep that in mind, that you darken things as they kind of get close to the flowers so that it looks like they're behind the flowers. And then let them kind of, if you want to gradually lighten off, or even if you have a harder edge where they lighten off, that's fine too, because it just looks like it's a shadow. And that regularly happens on flower petals and flower leaves. So having the odd hard edge for your shadow is totally fine. Just going around and doing all these leaves, and if I want to keep it simple, I just do a little bit of dark green in some areas and then like kind of let it have a gradation and gradually go into the light green. And sometimes I'll try and also kind of pay attention to my edges here. I'm slopping a little bit. I'm just paying attention to my edges and kind of going dark at the edge and then lightening off. So there's a couple ways that you can keep it simple. And like I say, or you can do something more complex like this one here. But truthfully, they're all pretty, so it doesn't matter which one you choose or which level you feel you're at. You're going to end up with a beautiful piece at the end. And when you're working in the small shapes, I would just go ahead and keep them simple. Just fill them in with green. Don't even worry about trying to get texture really, or veins or anything like that. Just keep them nice and simple if you're working in a small area. So keep that in mind when you're working on a more prominent leaf that really shows and it's large. That's where you might want to think about the details more. If you're working on something small and it's not really showing too well, keep it simple, simplify it. And also think if you're working close to the edge, that's another good time to simplify, because you don't want to have a lot of detail kind of at the outer edge of your piece anyways, because you don't want to draw attention to the edge of the painting. You want to draw attention to the center. So that's actually just a rule in general with art. I just called it a painting, but like I say, colored pencil pieces can build to the point of being a painting. I don't think I'd call this a painting though. And if you're finding that some of the leaves are just kind of not working the way you want, don't worry about it. There's so many leaves, and that's the beauty of leaves and flowers. They're quite forgiving. So if you kind of tweak the edges a little bit or something goofy happens, you can just kind of reinvent the edge or erase, whatever you need to do. But sometimes you can just almost change the shape of the petal or the shape of the leaf so that it's just a little bit different. Nobody will know. It's not like you're doing a portrait that's gonna have a lot of important details that can't really be changed. Flowers and leaves have a lot of variation within them. If you decide you want the leaves to have a little bit more depth or a little bit more contrast, you can always do that using the indigo blue or the mulberry. I'm just going to show you that in a few spots quickly. However, I don't think it's necessary, but if you want to push it a little bit further, you can. So I'll show you what I mean. So maybe this petal or this little leaf back here, we decide we want to darken the edge. You can just throw a little bit of that indigo blue and it will kind of add just a tiny bit of punch to the darks so that they're just a tiny bit darker. Some places you might choose to add the indigo. If you feel like you need a little bit more depth in some of your shadows, you can throw a little bit of the indigo blue and just push it a little bit. So maybe behind some of the leaves, or sorry, behind some of the petals where there's just a nice hard shadow that's maybe getting cast on those leaves, you could just deepen it a little bit with a little bit of indigo, make it pop a little bit more. It makes the flower come forwards a little bit more. And you can even add a tiny bit of this mulberry color if you want to. Let me grab it. The wrong one in my hand. The mulberry, you can always just throw a tiny bit of that color into your shadows as well. It's going to neutralize the green and make it just a little bit more of a dull green, and it's going to darken it a little bit further. That's a totally optional step, but if you're feeling like, you know what, this green is too bright, you can always dull it down with the mulberry. So I use a combination of indigo blue and mulberry just to kind of push your shadows just into the darks just a little further. But like I say, adding those darks is really optional because it looks pretty good just as it is. And if you're going to do that on these leaves, again, you would put it in the darkest areas. So the areas where we're pushing our darks with our dark green, you would just push the darks further with your indigo and possibly your mulberry purple. One area I decided to add a little shadow is behind this bud here. So this bud, I'm going to say it's casting a shadow onto this leaf. So this leaf was pretty boring looking. I decided to go ahead and put a little bit of dark green there. Just make it look like it's got a shadow on it. Maybe I'll even throw a little bit of the indigo blue just to push that shadow a little bit further. There's just a few spots that I'm noticing the edges are not quite the way I want them. Like I say, you can kind of invent these a little bit too, but I just feel like I kind of got a little bit sloppy. And just taking a minute to maybe deepen these browns a little bit more. I might just throw a tiny bit of Tuscan red into these little stamens just to add a little bit more punch, because I just feel like they could be a little bit darker in a few spots. All right, I guess that brings us to the end of this piece. I really enjoy doing this together with you. Let's go ahead and lift this tape off. So we have a nice clean edge there. And it's peeling well, so that's good. It's sticking a little bit at the edge, but it's peeling off fairly well. And we can go ahead and just cut that out. I would cut along these gray lines here. You can use scissors, or if you have a paper cutter that you like using, go ahead and use that, and then just fold it. I went ahead and cut mine out with a paper cutter and folded it. And now we've got a beautiful card that we can share with someone, a loved one, a friend, someone that we want to show our gratefulness and appreciation towards. And I want to say thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, that it will bless whoever you share it with, and it's inspired you to enjoy your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye.